एवरीवन, वेलकम टू माय यूट्यूब चैनल द सोलफुल डायरी। आज के वीडियो में हम बात करेंगे एरिस्टोटल्स पोएटिक के बारे में। चलिए शुरू करते हैं आज की वीडियो। Poetry as imitation. The first scandal in the Poetics is the initial marking out of dramatic poetry as a form of imitation. We call the poet a creator and are offended at the suggestion that he might be merely some sort of reporting device, as the painter's eye teaches us how to look and shows us what we never saw. The dramatist presents things that never existed until he imagined them and makes us experience worlds we could never have found a way to on our own. But Aristotle has no intention to diminish the poet and in fact says the same thing I just said in making the point that poetry is more philosophic than history. By imitation, Aristotle does not mean the sort of mimicry by which Aristophanes say fine syllables that approximate the sound of frogs. He's speaking of the imitation of action, and by action he does not mean mere happenings. Aristotle speaks extensively of praxis in the Nicomachean Ethics. It is not a word he uses loosely, and in fact his use of it in the definition of tragedy recalls the discussion in its ethics. Aristotle action, as Aristotle uses the word, refers only to what is deliberately chosen and capable of finding completion in the achievement of some purpose. Animals and young children do not act in this sense, and action is not the whole of the life of any of us. The poet must have an eye for the emergence of action in human life and a sense for the actions that are worth paying attention to. They are not present in the world in such a way that a video camera could detect them. An intelligent feeling shaping human soul must find them. By the same token, the action of the drama itself is not on the stage. It takes form and has its being in the imagination of the spectator. The actor speak and move and gesture, but it is the poet who speaks through them from imagination to present to us the thing that he has made. Because that thing he makes has the form of an action, it has to be seen and held together just as actively and attentively by us as by him. The imitation is the thing that is reproduced in us and for us by his art. This is a powerful kind of human communication, and the thing imitated is what defines the human realm. If not one had the power to imitate action, life must just wash over us without leaving any trace. How do I know that Aristotle intends the imitation of action to be understood in this way? In De Anima, he distinguishes three kinds of perception. There is the perception of proper sensible color, sound, and taste, and so on. This lies on the surface of things and can be mimicked directly for sense perception, but there is also perception of common sensibles available to more than one of our senses as shape is grasped both by sight and touch, or number by all five senses. These are distinguished by imagination. The powers in us that are shared by the five senses, in which the circular shape, for instance, is not dependent on sight or touch alone. These common sensibles can be, for instance, is not dependent on sight or touch alone. These common sensibles can be mimicked in various ways, as when I draw a messy, meandering ridge of chalk on a blackboard and your imagination grasps a circle. Finally, there is the perception of which the sensible qualities are attributes. The thing the son of Tyrus, for example, it is this that we ordinarily mean by perception, and while its object always has an image in the imagination, it can only be distinguished by intellect. Skilled mimics can imitate people we know by voice, gesture, and so on. And here already we must engage and engage intelligence and imagination together. Dramatis imitates things more remote from the eye and ear than familiar people. Sophocles and Shakespeare, for example, imitate repentance and forgiveness. True instance of action in Aristotle's sense of the word, and we need all human power to recognize what these poets put before us. So, the mere face imitation of an action is packed with meaning available to us as soon as we ask what an action is and how the image of such a thing might be perceived. Aristotle does understand that tragedy as a development out of the child's mimicry of animal noises, but that is in the same way that he understands philosophy as a development out of enjoyment of sightseeing. In each of these developments, there is a vast array of possible intermediate stages, but just as philosophy is the ultimate form of the innate desires to know, tragedy is considered by Aristotle the ultimate form of our innate delight in imitation. His beloved Homer saw and achieved the most important possibilities of the imitation of human action, but it was the tragedians who refined and enhanced the form of that imitation and discovered its perfection. Character of tragedy. A work is a tragedy, Aristotle tells us, only if it arouses pity and fear. Why does he single out these two passions? Some interpreters think he means them only as examples, pity and fear, and other passions like that, but I'm not among those loose constructionists. Aristotle does use a word that means passions of that sort, but I think he does so only to indicate that pity and fear are not themselves things subject to identification with pinpoint precision, but that each refers to a range of feelings. Just the feelings in these two ranges, however, that belong to tragedy. Why? Why shouldn't some tragedy arouse pity and joy and say and another fear and cruelty? In various places Aristotle says that it is the mark of an educated person to know what needs explanation and what doesn't. He does not try to prove that there is such a thing as nature or such a thing as emotion, though some people deny both. Likewise, he understands the recognition of a special and powerful form of drama built around pity and fear as the beginning of an inquiry and spends not one word justifying the restriction. We, however, can see better why he starts there by trying out a few simple alternatives. Suppose a drama aroused pity in a powerful way but aroused no fear at all. This is an easy recognizable dramatic form called the tearjerker. The name is meant to disparage the sort of drama, but why? Imagine a well written, well made play or movie that depicts the losing struggle of a likable central character. We are moved to have a good cry and are afforded either to a relief of a happy ending or the realistic desolation of a sad one. In the one case, the tension built up along the way is released within the experience of the work itself. In the other, it passes off as we leave the theatre and readjust our feelings to the fact that it was, after all, only make believe. What is wrong with that? There's always pleasure and strong emotion, and the theatre is a harmless place to indulge it. We may even come out feeling good about being so compassionate, but Dostoevsky depicts a character who loves to cry in the theatre, not noticing that while she wallows in her warm feelings, her coach driver is shivering outside. She has daydreams about relieving suffering humanity, but does not think to put that vague desire to work. If she is typical, then the tearjerker is a dishonest form of drama, not even a harmless diversion, but an encouragement to lie to oneself. Well, then let's consider the opposite experiment in which a drama arouses fear in a powerful way but arouses little or no pity. This is a sign a readily recognizable dramatic form called a horror story, or in a recent fashion, a match slasher movie. The thrill of fear is the primary object of such amusement, and the story alternates between the build-up of apparition and the shock of violence. Again, as with the tearjerker, it doesn't matter much whether it ends happily or with uneasiness or with even with one last shock. So indeterminate is its form, and while the tearjerker gives us an illusion of compassionate delicacy, the unrestrained shock drama obviously has the effect of coercing feelings. Genuine human pity could not coexist with the so-called graphic effects these films used to keep scaring us. The attraction of this kind of amusement is again the thrill of strong feeling, and again the price of indulging the desire for that thrill may be high. Let us consider a milder form of drama built on arousing fear. There are stories in which fearsome things are threatened or done by characters who are in the end defeated by means similar to one or in some way equivalent to what they dealt out. The fear is relieved in vengeance, and we feel a satisfaction that we might be inclined to call justice. To work on the level of feeling true justice must be understood as the exact inverse of the crime doing to the offender, the sort of things he did or meant to do to others. The imagination of evil then becomes the measure of good, or at least of the restoration of order. The satisfaction we feel in the vicarious infliction of pain or death is nothing but a thin veil out the very feeling we mean to be punishing. This is a successful dramatic formula arousing in us destructive desires that are fun to feel, along with the self-righteous illusion that we are really superior to the character who displays them. The playwright who makes us feel that way will probably be popular, but here's a menace. We have looked at three kinds of non tragedy that arouse passions in a destructive way, and we could add others. There are potentially as many kinds as there are passions, and combinations of passions that suggest that the theatre is just an arena for the manipulation of passions in ways that are pleasant in the short run, or at least reckless to pursue repeatedly. At worst, the drama could be seen as stealing in a kind of addiction, with it both produces and holds the only remedy for. But we have not yet tried to talk about the combination of passions characteristic of tragedy. Turn from the sort of examples I have given to the acknowledged examples of tragedy, we find ourselves in a different world. The tragedies I have in mind are five: Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, Shakespeare, who differs from them only in time, and Homer, who differs from them somewhat more in the form in which he composed, but shares with them the things that matter most. I could add the other authors such as Dostoevsky, who wrote the stories of the tragic kind in much looser literary form, but I want to keep the focus on a small number of clear paradigms. When we look at a tragedy, we find the chorus in Antigone telling us what a strange thing a human being is, that passes beyond all boundaries, or King Lear asking if man is no more than this, a poor bare-fogged animal, or Macbeth protesting to his wife, I dare to do all that may become a man who dares to more is none, or Oedipus taunting Tiresias with the fact that divine art was of no use against the Sphinx, but only Oedipus' own human ingenuity, or Agamemnon resisting walking home, or Tapestry saying to his wife, I tell you to revere me as a man, not a god, or Cadmus in the Battery saying, I am a man, nothing more, while Dionysus tells Pentheus, you do not know what you are, or Patroclus telling Achilles, Peleus was not your father, nor Thetis your mother, but the grey sea bore you, and the towering rock so hard as that is your heart. I could add more examples of this kind by a dozen, and your memories will supply others. Tragedy seems always to involve testing or finding the limits of what is human. There is no mere orgy of strong feeling, but a highly focused way of bringing our powers to bear on a image of what is human as such. I suggest that Aristotle is right in saying that the powers which first of all bring this human image to sight for us are pity and fear. It is obvious that the authors in our examples are not just putting things in front of us to make us cry or shiver or gasp. The feeling they arouse are subordinated to the effect. Aristotle begins by saying that tragedy arouses pity and fear in such a way as to culminate in a cleansing of those passions. The famous catharsis, the word is used by Aristotle only the once in his preliminary definition of tragedy. I think this is because its role is taken over later by the Poetics by another more positive word, But the idea of catharsis is important in itself. We should consider what might mean catharsis. First of all, the tragic catharsis might be a purgation. Fear can obviously be an insidious thing that undermines life and poisons it with anxiety. It would be good to flush this feeling from our systems, bring it into the open and clear the air. This may explain the appeal of horror movies, that they redirect our fears towards something external, grotesque, and final ridiculous in order to puncture them. On the other hand, fear might have a secret allure so that we need what we need to purge is the desire for the thrill that comes with fear. The horror movie also provides a safe way to indulge and satisfy the longing to feel afraid and go home afterward satisfied. The desire is purged temporarily by being fed. Our souls are so many heated that opposite satisfaction may be felt at the same time, but I think these two really are opposite. In the first sense of purgation, the horror movie is a kind of medicine that does its work and leaves the soul healthier, while in the second sense, it is potentially addictive drug. Either explanation may account for the popularity of these movies among teenagers, since fear is so much a fact of that time of life. For those of us who are older, the tearjerker may have more appeal of offering a way to purge the regrets of a life and a sentimental outpouring of pity. As with fear, the purgation too may be either medicinal or drug-like. This idea of purgation in its various forms is what we usually mean when we call something cathartic. People speak of watching football or boxing as a catharsis of violent urges, or recall a shouting match with a friend a useful catharsis of buried resentment. This is a practical purpose that drama may also serve, but it has no particular connection with beauty or truth. To be good in this purgative way, a drama has no need to be good in any other way. No one would be tempted to confuse the feeling at the end of a horror movie with what Aristotle calls the tragic pleasure, not to call such a movie a tragedy, but the English word catharsis does not contain everything that is in the Greek word. Let us look at other things it might mean. Catharsis in Greek can mean purification, while purging something means getting rid of it. Purifying something means getting rid of the worst or baser parts of it. It is possible that tragedy purifies the feelings themselves of fear and pity. These arise in us in crude way, attached to all sorts of objects. Perhaps the poet educates our sensibilities, our powers to feel and be moved by refining them and attaching them to less easily discernible objects. There is a line in the wasteland. I will show you fear in a handful of dust. Alfred Hitchcock once made us all feel a little shudder when we took showers. The poetic imagination is limited only by its skills and can turn any object into a focus for any feeling. Some people turn to poetry to find delicious and exquisite new ways to feel old feelings and consider themselves to enter in that way into a purified state. It has been argued that this sort of thing is what tragedy and the tragic pleasure are all about, but it doesn't match up with my experience. Sophocles does make me fear and pity human knowledge when I watch the Oedipus Tyrannus, but this is not a refinement of those feelings, but a discovery that they belong to a surprising object. Sophocles is not training my feelings, but using them to show me something worthy of wonder. The word catharsis drops out of the poetics because the word wonder to Romston replaces it. First, in chapter 9, where Aristotle argues that pity and fear arise most of all where wonder does, and finally in chapter 24 and 25, where he singles out wonder as the aim of the poetic art itself, into which the aim of tragedy in particular merges. Ask yourself how you feel at the end of tragedy. You have witnessed horrible things and felt painful feelings, but the mark of tragedy is that it brings you out the other side. Aristotle's use of the word catharsis is not a technical reference to purgation or purification, but a beautiful metaphor for a peculiar tragic pleasure, the feeling of being washed or cleansed. The tragic pleasure is a a paradox. As Aristotle says, in a tragedy, a happy ending doesn't make us happy. At the end of the play, the stage is often littered with bodies and we feel cleansed by it all. Are we like Clytemnestra, who says she rejoiced when spattered by her husband's blood like the earth in a spring rain? Are we like Iago, who has to see a beautiful life destroyed to feel better about himself? We all feel a certain glee in the bringing glow of the mighty, but this is in no way similar to the feeling of being washed in wonderment. The closest thing I know to the feeling at the end of the tragedy is the one that comes with the sudden, unexpected appearance of something beautiful. In a famous essay on the beauty, Plotinus says two things that seem true to me clearly: is something detected at a first glance, something that the soul recognizes, gives welcome to, and in a way fuses with. What is the effect of on us for of this? Plotinus says that in every instance is an astonishment, a delicious wonderment. Aristotle is insistent that a tragedy must be whole and one, because only in that way can it be beautiful, while he also ascribes the superiority of tragedy over epic poetry to its greater unity and concentration. Tragedy is not just a dramatic form in which some works are beautiful and others not. Tragedy is in itself a species of beauty. All tragedies are beautiful. By following Aristotle's lead, we have now found five marks of tragedy. It imitates an action, it arouses pity and fear, it displays human image as such, it ends in wonder, and it is inherently beautiful. We noticed earlier that it is the action that characterizes the distinctively human realm, and it is reasonable that the depiction of an action might show us a human being in some definitive way. But what do pity and fear have to do with that showing? The answer is everything. आई होप आज की वीडियो आपको पसंद है। कैसे लगे हमें कमेंट करके बताएं। अगर वीडियो अच्छी लगी हो तो लाइक शेयर एंड सब्सक्राइब टू माय चैनल। मिलते हैं कल एक और इन्फॉर्मेटिव वीडियो के साथ शाम 4 बजे। टिल देन कीप वॉचिंग एंड कीप सपोर्टिंग द सोलफुल डायरी। थैंक यू।